Some moments in life are fleeting yet powerful enough to alter the course of everything. For Ethan Carter, it all began with a glance. Not just any glance, a lingering, mesmerizing look that froze time and sent his heart racing. It was on an ordinary summer evening, during one of his mother's backyard gatherings, when he first saw her differently. Madison Green, his mother's best friend, was an embodiment of grace and beauty. At 33, she carried herself with a quiet confidence that seemed to command the world around her. Her laughter was contagious, her smile radiant, and her dark, wavy hair fell in effortless cascades over her shoulders. Ethan had known her for years, but that evening, under the dim glow of string lights and with a glass of wine in her hand, she appeared almost otherworldly. Ethan couldn't look away. "You're staring, kid," Madison teased, catching him off guard. Her tone was playful, but her piercing green eyes held his gaze a little longer than they should have. He flushed, quickly looking down at his drink. "Sorry, I didn't mean." "You're fine," she said, chuckling softly. "But your mom might think you're plotting something." She walked off with that effortless stride, leaving him to wrestle with a newfound feeling stirring deep within, a strange mixture of admiration and something more dangerous. Ethan had always admired Madison in the way any young man might admire a beautiful woman. She was the fun, single friend his mom often spoke about, the one who lived alone in a charming little house just down the street. But admiration had now grown into an unshakable fixation. What had changed? Perhaps it was the fact that she was different from the girls his age. Madison was confident, mature, and completely unattainable, or so he thought. Over the weeks that followed, Ethan found himself going out of his way to see her. He volunteered to deliver groceries when she called his mom asking for help, lingered at his mom's social gatherings just to catch glimpses of her, and paid extra attention when she spoke. It wasn't long before Madison began to notice. "You're spending an awful lot of time here," she remarked one afternoon when he dropped off a bag of oranges at her doorstep. Ethan shrugged, trying to seem casual. "Mom asked me to help." "I didn't mind," Madison smiled, leaning against the door frame. "Well, thanks, Ethan. You're sweet." Her words, simple as they were, lingered in his mind long after he left her house. Madison wasn't blind to Ethan's attention. At first, she dismissed it as a harmless crush, something every young man experienced at some point. But as weeks turned into months, she began to notice how his eyes lingered on her, how his voice softened when he spoke to her, and how his presence seemed to light up whenever she was around. At 33, Madison had long given up on finding love. Her previous relationships had been disastrous, leaving her cynical and guarded. She envied her best friend, Ethan's mother, who had a family and a husband who adored her, yet, there was something about Ethan's genuine admiration that stirred something in her. He was kind, intelligent, and had a way of making her feel seen in a way no one had before. Still, she knew the risks. What would people say? How would his mother, her best friend, react? Madison convinced herself it was just a fleeting thought, a silly indulgence, until one evening changed everything. It was a stormy night when it happened. Ethan's mother had asked him to check on Madison after the power in her neighborhood went out. When he arrived, rain-soaked and shivering, she ushered him inside with a towel. "Thanks for coming," she said, lighting a candle. The dim glow cast a golden hue over her face, making her look even more breathtaking. "It's no problem," Ethan replied, his voice barely above a whisper. As the storm raged outside, they sat on the couch, talking. For the first time, Madison let her guard down, sharing stories of her failed relationships and her fears of ending up alone. "You'll never be alone," Ethan said suddenly, his voice firm. She looked at him, startled. "What do you mean?" "I mean it," he said, leaning closer. "You're incredible, Madison. You deserve to be loved, to be happy." The tension in the room was palpable. Madison opened her mouth to respond, but found herself at a loss for words. Before she could stop herself, she leaned in, her lips brushing against his. The kiss was brief but electric, leaving them both breathless. Madison pulled away, her eyes wide with panic. "We can't, this is wrong," she whispered. Ethan shook his head. "It doesn't feel wrong to me," she stood abruptly, pacing the room. "Your mother?" "Ethan, do you know what this would do to her?" "I know," he said quietly, standing to face her. "But I can't help how I feel." Madison stared at him, torn between her fears and the undeniable connection she felt. "We need to think about this," she said finally, but deep down, they both knew there was no turning back. The kiss haunted Madison in the days that followed. Every time she closed her eyes, she could feel the warmth of Ethan's lips on hers, the intensity of his gaze, and the way her heart raced in a way it hadn't in years. But every logical thought in her mind screamed at her to end it before it went any further. Ethan, on the other hand, was emboldened. He couldn't stop thinking about her, her smile, her voice, her presence. He knew it was risky, but he was willing to take the chance. Their interactions became a delicate dance of stolen glances, lingering touches, and whispered conversations. The fear of being caught only added to the excitement, but it also brought complications. One evening, during another of his mother's gatherings, Madison pulled Ethan aside. "We can't keep doing this," she said, her voice trembling. "We're not doing anything wrong," he argued, keeping his voice low. "I care about you, Madison," she shook her head. "You're young, Ethan. You don't understand the consequences. Your mother, she'd never forgive me." "I'm not a kid," he snapped, his frustration boiling over. "I know what I feel, and I know you feel it too." Madison hesitated, her resolve crumbling. She knew he was right, but the weight of what they were risking was suffocating. Their secret was almost exposed during a weekend trip Ethan's mother had planned for the three of them. Madison had initially refused to join, but Ethan's mother insisted. "You need to get out more," she had said, oblivious to the tension between her son and her best friend. At the cabin, Ethan and Madison struggled to keep their feelings hidden. Every accidental touch felt like fire, every shared glance a confession. One evening, while his mother was out gathering firewood, Ethan cornered Madison in the kitchen. "You've been avoiding me," he said softly, his voice laced with hurt. "I have to," she whispered, glancing nervously at the door. Before she could say more, Ethan leaned in and kissed her. It was impulsive, reckless, but neither of them could stop. The sound of the front door opening snapped them back to reality. Madison pushed him away just in time, her heart pounding as his mother walked in. "You two okay?" his mother asked, eyeing them suspiciously. Madison forced a smile. "Just talking about dinner," but the look on his mother's face suggested she wasn't entirely convinced. Despite their best efforts to stay apart, the pull between Ethan and Madison only grew stronger. They began meeting in secret, late-night walks, quick drives out of town, stolen hours at her house, but their secret relationship wasn't without its challenges. Ethan struggled with the guilt of hiding the truth from his mother, while Madison wrestled with the fear of being judged by the world. One night, during one of their clandestine meetings, Madison broke down. "I can't do this anymore, Ethan," she said through tears. "It's too much. The guilt, the secrecy, it's tearing me apart." Ethan held her tightly. "I love you, Madison. We'll figure it out, I promise. Just don't give up on us." His words were sincere, but neither of them could ignore the storm brewing on the horizon. Their carefully constructed world came crashing down on a quiet Sunday afternoon. Ethan's mother had grown increasingly suspicious of their closeness, and when she saw Ethan's car parked outside Madison's house for hours, she decided to confront her friend. The knock on the door startled them both. Madison froze, panic etched across her face. "It's her," she whispered. Ethan's heart sank. There was no way to explain this away. When Madison opened the door, Ethan's mother looked from her to her son, realization dawning on her face. "What's going on here?" she demanded, her voice trembling. Madison stammered, searching for the right words, but Ethan stepped forward. "Mom, I need you to hear us out." The room fell silent as Ethan explained everything, their feelings, their struggles, their love. His mother's expression shifted from shock to betrayal to anger. "How could you do this to me?" she asked Madison, tears streaming down her face. "You're my best friend. I trusted you." Madison couldn't meet her eyes. "I never meant to hurt you," she said quietly. "I fought it, I did. But I love him." His mother turned to Ethan, her voice breaking. "And you? Do you even understand what you've done?" Ethan stood firm. "I know it's hard for you to accept, but I love her, Mom." This isn't some phase. The conversation ended with his mother storming out, leaving them both to face the fallout of their confession. The weeks that followed were some of the hardest they had ever faced. Ethan's mother refused to speak to either of them, and word of their relationship began to spread through their small community. Friends and neighbors whispered behind their backs, and Madison faced harsh judgment from those who once admired her. Ethan's college friends questioned his choices, and even his professors began to treat him differently. Through it all, Ethan and Madison clung to each other, their love growing stronger in the face of adversity. Madison had never felt love like this before. Despite the challenges, Ethan's unwavering devotion gave her the strength to keep going. "You've changed my life," she told him one evening as they sat on the porch of her house. "I never thought I'd feel this way again." Ethan smiled, taking her hand. "You're my everything, Madison. I'll fight for us, for as long as it takes." Their love story was far from perfect, but it was real, messy, complicated, and undeniably deep. Ethan's mother, Susan, had always prided herself on being a level-headed woman, but this was a betrayal she couldn't comprehend. Her best friend and her son, together? The thought alone kept her up at night, her mind spinning with questions and anger. She ignored Ethan's attempts to explain and shut Madison out completely, refusing to answer calls or open her door. At work, Susan confided in a colleague, who was both shocked and intrigued. "You need to do something about this," her friend said. "If you don't, people are going to start talking more than they already are." Susan's silence wasn't just hurting her, it was fueling gossip. Whispers of the scandal began spreading beyond their neighborhood, reaching church groups and local community events. Susan's shame turned into resentment. She wasn't just hurt, she felt betrayed by everyone she cared about. One night, Madison received a letter in her mailbox. The envelope was unmarked, but the message inside was chilling. "What you're doing is disgusting. People like you don't deserve happiness. End it now, or we'll make sure you regret it." Her hands shook as she read the note, her stomach twisting in fear. She showed it to Ethan, who immediately wanted to report it to the police. "No," Madison said firmly. "If we go to the police, it'll only make things worse. I can't handle more people knowing." But the letter wasn't an isolated incident. Over the next few weeks, she received harassing phone calls, strange knocks on her door at night, and another anonymous note that simply read, "Homewrecker." Ethan was furious. "This isn't just about us anymore," he said. "This is harassment, Madison. We have to do something." Madison hesitated, torn between protecting herself and protecting Ethan from more backlash. Surprisingly, help came from an unexpected place. Susan's husband, Ethan's father, Mark, had been quietly observing the chaos from the sidelines. While he didn't fully understand the situation, he could see the toll it was taking on his family. One evening, he approached Susan as she sat silently on the couch, staring at old family photos. "You need to talk to them," he said gently. Susan shook her head. "I can't. I feel like I've lost both of them." "You haven't lost anyone," Mark replied. "But you will if you don't try to understand. Ethan's our son, Susan. And Madison. She's still the same person you've known for years." His words planted a seed of doubt in Susan's mind. She wasn't ready to forgive, but she couldn't deny that her silence was doing more harm than good. Things reached a boiling point when Ethan's college issued a formal warning after receiving complaints about his relationship with Madison. A professor, who had overheard students gossiping, reported the situation to the administration, citing ethical concerns. Ethan was furious. "They can't do this, it's my personal life." "They can," Madison said grimly. "And they will. People don't care about what's right, Ethan. They care about appearances." Feeling cornered, Ethan made a bold decision. He dropped out of college, determined to stand by Madison no matter the cost. When he told his parents, Susan was livid. "You're throwing your future away for this?" "For her," she yelled. "It's not just for her," Ethan shot back. "It's for me. This is my life, Mom. I love her, and I'm not going to let anyone dictate how I live it." Madison, however, was reaching her breaking point. The constant judgment, the anonymous threats, and the strain on Ethan's family were taking a toll on her mental health. "I don't know if I can do this anymore," she admitted one night, tears streaming down her face. "Maybe your mom was right. Maybe we shouldn't have started this." Ethan grabbed her hands, his voice desperate. "Don't say that. We've come this far, Madison. We can't give up now." But Madison wasn't convinced. "I've ruined everything for you, Ethan. Your family, your education, your future. You've given me something no one else ever could," he interrupted. "You've given me love, real love. That's worth more than anything else." His words brought her comfort, but the weight of their struggles still loomed over them. After weeks of reflection, Susan finally decided to confront Madison. She showed up at her door unannounced, her expression unreadable. Madison opened the door cautiously. "Susan, we need to talk," Susan said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. The conversation was tense, filled with long silences and painful admissions. Madison apologized profusely, explaining that she never intended to hurt anyone. Susan listened quietly, her emotions conflicting. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you," Susan said finally. "But I can see how much Ethan cares about you. And as much as I hate this, I can't lose my son." It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a start. With Susan slowly coming around, things began to improve. The anonymous threats stopped after Madison and Ethan installed security cameras and made it clear they wouldn't be intimidated. Ethan found a new passion, starting a small business with Madison's encouragement. Their love, tested by countless challenges, only grew stronger. One evening, as they sat together on the porch, Ethan turned to Madison. "I know this hasn't been easy, but I wouldn't trade it for anything." Madison smiled, leaning her head on his shoulder. "Neither would I. You've given me a love I never thought I'd have." Their journey was far from over, but for the first time in a long time, they felt hopeful about the future. Just when Ethan and Madison began to find their footing, a shadow from Madison's past resurfaced, her ex-fiancé, Ryan. Years ago, Ryan had left Madison just weeks before their wedding, leaving her heartbroken and disillusioned. She hadn't heard from him since. One afternoon, as Madison sat in a local cafe waiting for Ethan, she felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned and froze. "It was Ryan, Madison," he said with a soft smile. "I can't believe it's you." Her heart raced, but not in the way it did with Ethan. It was fear, anger, and confusion all at once. "Ryan," she replied, her voice cold. "What are you doing here?" Ryan explained that he had moved back to town and had heard about her scandalous relationship with a younger man. His tone was condescending, his words dripping with judgment. Madison's hands trembled, but she held her ground. "I don't need your advice, Ryan. You lost the right to care about my life when you walked out of it." Before he could say more, Ethan walked in. Seeing Ryan leaning close to Madison, his protective instincts kicked in. "Everything okay here?" Ethan asked, his voice firm. Ryan smirked. "So, this is the kid?" "Figures." Ethan stepped closer, his jaw tight. "You should leave." Ryan laughed, but eventually walked away, leaving a tense silence between Ethan and Madison. Ryan's sudden reappearance shook Madison to her core. Although she didn't care for him anymore, his words planted seeds of doubt. Was she holding Ethan back? Did he deserve someone closer to his age? Ethan noticed her withdrawal and confronted her one evening. "What's going on, Madison? You've been distant ever since you saw him. I don't want to ruin your life," she admitted, tears welling up in her eyes. "Ryan's right. You could have someone who doesn't come with all this baggage." Ethan took her hands, his voice steady. "I don't want anyone else. I chose you, Madison. We've faced so much already, and I'm not giving up now." Her doubts didn't disappear overnight, but Ethan's unwavering support reminded her why their love was worth fighting for. Ethan knew he had to do something to show Madison how committed he was. He spent weeks planning, carefully considering every detail. On a quiet autumn evening, he took her to the spot where they shared their first secret walk, a secluded clearing in the woods, lit by fairy lights he'd strung up earlier. As they walked hand in hand, Madison gasped at the sight. "Ethan, what is this?" He smiled nervously, pulling her closer. "It's a reminder of where we started. And a promise for where we're going." Before she could respond, he dropped to one knee, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. "Madison Green," he began, his voice shaking slightly. "You've changed my life in ways I never thought possible. I don't care about the whispers or the judgments. All I care about is you. Will you marry me?" Tears streamed down Madison's face as she nodded. "Yes, Ethan." Yes, their embrace was filled with love and relief, but they both knew the road ahead would still be fraught with challenges. When Susan heard about the engagement, her reaction was anything but joyful. She called Ethan over, her tone sharp and unforgiving. "This has gone too far, Ethan," she said. "Marriage? Do you even understand what you're committing to?" "I understand perfectly," Ethan replied, his voice calm but firm. "I love her, Mom. That's all that matters." Susan shook her head. "Love isn't enough. You're young. You don't see the bigger picture." "I see it just fine," he shot back. "You're the one who refuses to see that Madison makes me happy." Susan's face softened for a moment, her emotions warring within her. "Ethan, I just want what's best for you, and Madison is what's best for me," he said, standing his ground. Susan didn't respond, but the conversation left her more conflicted than ever. As their wedding day approached, Madison began receiving strange messages again. This time, the tone was more sinister. "You'll regret this. You don't belong together." Ethan insisted on involving the police. But the lack of evidence made it difficult to take any action. Then, just a week before the wedding, Madison's car was vandalized. The words, "Homewrecker," were spray-painted across the hood. It was the breaking point for both of them. "Whoever this is, they're not going to scare us," Ethan said, his determination unshaken. Madison, though shaken, agreed. "We've come too far to let anyone stop us now." The night before the wedding, Susan showed up at Madison's house. She looked tired, her usual confidence replaced with uncertainty. "I don't know if I'll ever fully understand this," she began, her voice wavering. "But I can see how much you love each other. And if my son believes in you, then I'm willing to try." Madison's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you, Susan. That means more than you know." It wasn't a full reconciliation, but it was enough to give them hope. Their wedding was a small, intimate affair, held in the same clearing where Ethan proposed. As they exchanged vows, the love between them was palpable, silencing any doubts or fears. Susan sat in the front row, tears streaming down her face as she watched her son marry the woman she never expected but was slowly learning to accept. As Ethan and Madison shared their first dance, they knew their journey was far from over. The world would continue to judge them, challenges would arise, but their love had proven itself unshakable. For the first time in years, Madison felt truly free. And for Ethan, the future had never looked brighter. Months after their wedding, life began to settle into a new rhythm. But the shadow of the threat still lingered over Ethan and Madison. Though they tried to move forward, the fear of the unknown kept them vigilant. That fear finally ended one fateful night. Madison was at home alone, tidying up the nursery she and Ethan had lovingly prepared. The baby was due in a few weeks, and anticipation filled the air. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. She hesitated. Ethan wasn't due back from work for another hour. Looking through the peephole, she saw a man she didn't recognize. He wore a hoodie, his face partially obscured. Madison's heart pounded as she stepped back, her instincts screaming at her to stay quiet. Before she could call Ethan, her phone buzzed. It was him. "Don't open the door," Ethan said urgently. "The police are on their way." As it turned out, Ethan had been tracking down leads on his own. A small business near Madison's house had security cameras, and Ethan managed to get footage of a man lurking around the property the night Madison's car was vandalized. The footage led to a name, a former acquaintance of Ryan's, someone with a grudge against Madison for rejecting Ryan years ago. The police arrived within minutes, catching the man before he could flee. Madison watched from the window as they handcuffed him, relief washing over her. The nightmare was finally over. 3 weeks later, Madison went into labor. Ethan, though normally calm under pressure, was a nervous wreck as he drove her to the hospital, his hand gripping hers the entire way. After hours of labor, their baby boy entered the world, his cries filling the room. Madison held him close, tears streaming down her face. "He's perfect," she whispered. Ethan leaned in, his voice thick with emotion. "You're amazing, Madison. Both of you are." They named him Lucas, a name that symbolized light after all the darkness they had endured. The first time Susan held Lucas, something shifted in her heart. As the tiny baby wrapped his fingers around hers, tears welled up in her eyes. For the first time, she allowed herself to truly see Madison not as the woman who had disrupted her life, but as the mother of her grandchild and the woman her son loved deeply. "You've made my son so happy," Susan said softly, her voice breaking. "And now you've given me this little miracle." Madison looked up, her own eyes misty. "Thank you for giving me a chance, Susan. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'll spend the rest of my life proving I love your son." Susan hugged her for the first time in years. It wasn't just forgiveness, it was acceptance. Lucas became the thread that tied their fractured family together. Susan visited often, doting on her grandson and slowly rebuilding her relationship with Ethan. Over time, the tension and awkwardness melted away, replaced by genuine warmth and laughter. Ethan couldn't help but smile as he watched his mother and Madison chat like old friends while Lucas babbled in his high chair. "I told you," he whispered to Madison one evening as they lay in bed. "Our love could survive anything." Madison smiled, resting her head on his chest. "It did. And now we have everything I never thought I'd have, a family, a future, and a love that's stronger than anything." As the years passed, Ethan and Madison built a beautiful life together. Lucas grew up surrounded by love, his parents' story becoming a testament to resilience and the power of following your heart. Madison often reflected on how far they had come, from stolen glances and secret meetings to a life filled with unconditional love and unwavering support. One evening, as they watched Lucas chase fireflies in the backyard, Madison turned to Ethan. "I never thought I'd say this, but I'm glad for every twist, every challenge. It led me here, to you, to him, to us." Ethan kissed her gently. "Me too. And I'll spend the rest of my life proving to you that you made the right choice." Their love story wasn't conventional. It wasn't easy. But it was theirs, and it was beautiful.
Please subscribe, like, comment and share this video. It means a lot to us. Thank you.